Hello, I'm Jenny Thomas, Director of Communication and Insight here at IWFM. Welcome to today's webinar, where we will be presenting and discussing the results from the 2024 Market Outlook Survey, which, without hinting too much at this year's story, we've subtitled, Keep Investing, the Tide is Turning. As usual, I'm joined by some excellent guests who we'll meet shortly. Now, followers of IWFM Research will know that this is our State of the Nation report, providing a comprehensive picture of how the UK market has performed over the last year, how it might do in the coming 12 months, and all of the positive and negative factors that you are wrestling with at a pretty important time for the nation. So not a session you'll want to miss. Welcome. This year, we offer even deeper and wider insights into the current state of the market, drawing on data from new questions and a new section on the historic performance of the FM market based on ONS data. Really worth a look at in the report. Together, this helps us to set out a broader picture of the value of workplace and facilities management, demonstrating that worth as employer, purchaser, and change driver across the workplace agenda. Among this year's enhancements are new questions on future drivers of growth, an expanded EDI question set, which has yielded really important and actionable insights, not least in the light of research that we were involved in earlier this year from the Young Foundation. Sustainability questions linked directly to our sustainability survey findings published in the early spring too. Now, any politicophobes might recoil a little bit at this point, but in anticipation of a major democratic moment in 2024, we did examine how workplace and facilities professionals are feeling and what the next government should do to better support the market. With the UK general election in barely 4 weeks' time, we might take your pulse on that later in the session if we've got time. Now, as usual, throughout the written report and today, we comment on the findings and share notes on how they link other IWFM resources and our policy work. And before we delve deeper into the findings, a special word of thanks to everybody who participated this year. Our insights would not be possible without you. You absolutely rallied to last year's call to get involved with 2024's work, and we had twice the number of respondents than last year, which only is a good thing. It only enriches our understanding, so thank you so much for that. Right, how we'll run. We're going to do the webinar in two parts today. First, we'll look at the key trends at an organisational and FM market level. Then we'll examine some specific findings related to EDI, sustainability, and of course, the upcoming election, if you can bear it. At the beginning of each section, Senior Research Manager Stuart Rutherford, who led the research, will take us through some of the key insights. And then after Stuart's scene setters, we'll discuss what we've heard and what it means with our now regular Outlook panellists, Sophie Hooper, IWFM's Head of Policy and Research, and Mark Whitaker, General Manager at Thompson FM Limited and Institute Chair, of course, from an IWFM and industry practitioner perspective, respectively. Welcome to all of you, to Stuart, Sophie, and Mark. I'd, as always, like to open the conversation up for discussion and Q&As and really explore some of the points that have come through. We'd love your questions and comments throughout the session. So please do post any that you have in the Q&A box from now on. And if you want to remain anonymous, please remember to type anon before your question and we won't say who you are. Sophie and Mark, welcome. Stuart, welcome. I think without further ado, because we're really tight for time today, I'm going to cross straight over to Stuart, if that's okay, and ask you to give us the general picture, Stuart, if you may. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Jenny. So as mentioned, we'll structure the session in two parts. In the first, we'll look at organisational changes in the last year to see whether things are getting better or worse, and then look at trends in market sentiment more generally. In the second part, we'll explore priorities and progress in the areas of sustainability and EDI. And with the election now just weeks away, we've got some beautifully timed findings to share with you. Importantly, and as shown on the cover of the report on the right-hand side here, we bring you good news this year. There are signs of stability and growth in the market. The tide is turning, as you'll see in the improved sailing conditions. You'll see there with the water and the weather conditions. And WFMs are doing the right thing to propel themselves forward. So specifically prioritizing the key areas and investing in technology, skills, training, and carbon reduction solutions. So all of those things that will fill the sails with air and help propel us forward. Just for context, these results come from our flagship annual survey, which Jenny mentioned, which had a record 488 completes. So again, to reiterate, a big response and a big thank you to all of those who took the time to participate. Timing-wise, the survey was in field in February and March this year, and we had workplace and facilities managers from a wide variety of organizations participating in the research, as well as FM service providers. Very similar respondent type to 2023 in terms of proportions, essentially just more of them. And that meant that we were able to build up a very robust picture, also a very comparable picture to last year, and to look deeper into the data and pull out even more insights. So I'll give you a kind of top slice in this presentation. There's lots more in the report. Let's start by looking at organizational changes. And just to orientate you in the slides that I'll be talking you through, I've included in pink at the top the actual question that the research findings relate to. So here it is, what has happened to each of the following within your organization over the last 12 months. And then we use colors in the report to indicate positive or negative changes. So in these initial slides, green is increase and dark green is significant increase. Red is decrease and dark red is significant decrease. And the bit in the middle in gray is essentially no change. So if we work our way through these pie charts and start with the two results on the top row, which relate to all respondents, so WFMs and FM service providers. And in the top middle, we have employment costs, which rocketed last year. They rose by 74%. Of organizations reported an increase in employment costs. That's a noticeable jump from last year's findings and an important finding in its own right. And linked to that is a fairly muted change in full-time equivalent headcount just to the right of the employment cost results. So you can see just over a third increased their headcount, but the rest either reported no change or decreased headcounts. Going to the row below this, so the bottom row, these results relate specifically to FM service providers. And starting on the left, to manage these cost increases, service providers have been pushing through price increases, and a significant proportion, 32%, have been prioritizing M&A activity. That's also important. And as a result, we see a similarly strong rise in turnover of 74%. Importantly, profitability, so bottom middle, hasn't risen to the same degree as turnover. In other words, FM service providers are seeing their margins squeezed as a result of the inflationary pressures. These results are for the same question. So what happened in your organization in the last 12 months, same color rules apply, but for budget. And what we see is for all the cost and price increases that I've just shown you, there is real and concerning inertia in budgets. The percentage of organizations that increased their budgets ticked up by just 1 percentage point in the last year, from 39% to 40%, while 33% of respondents reported a drop in budgets. The squeeze was worst in client-side public organizations, much less pronounced in FM service providers, but for the kind of the better or worse positions, this is a problem across the board. This is the same question again, but for the key categories of investments that we looked at. And the investment category that recorded the fastest growth is the one in the middle for carbon reduction solutions, where 60% of organizations indicated that they had increased their investments in the last 12 months. Interestingly, this is the first time we've asked about that particular investment category, and we're really encouraged by the results. That was great to see. Also positive results for a couple of other productivity-related investment categories. So over half of respondents said they had increased investments in technology in the last year. A little bit less, 36%, said they'd increased investment in skills and training. Moving on to the next set of findings, again, the same question, but asking about changes in area of space managed and workspace investments, two really important indicators to get a clear view on. And after all of the historic concerns about the future of offices and workspace, we found that more organizations had increased their area of space managed in the last 12 months than decreased the space managed. So the green is bigger than the red. Similarly, with workplace investments, that was more likely to have increased than decreased in the last 12 months. And both of those positive dynamics are expected to continue in the next 12 months. So more green than red going forward, more increases than decreases. So really good news there. Shifting the perspective from organizations to the FM market more generally, and one of the key tracking questions that we ask each year is this one: over the next 12 months, what do you think will happen to the FM market in the UK? The theme here is uncertainty. There are fewer optimists if you look at the green and essentially the decreases, and interestingly, fewer pessimists if you look at the red, and again, a kind of shrinking population of pessimists. The areas that grew were increased levels of people expecting no change, or increasing levels of people who simply don't know. So it's a classic retreat to a moderate opinion or no opinion at all. And again, an important finding and something that I'm sure Sophie and Mark will touch on. So just to round up quickly summarize the key findings from the results I've talked you through. So inflation is felt everywhere except in budgets. The WFM sector is investing in the right areas. There are encouraging signs for workspace managed now and in future, and uncertainty is still clouding the outlook for the sector. And if I can pass back to you, Jenny.
Thank you so much, Stuart. That was a really clear run through the top line findings there. And as you painted that image at the top of your session, I was immediately taken back to the biggest metaphor we had from last year's findings, which was a sector really, really fighting its way through in force 8 gales. So it's really interesting now to see that there's some change around. And without leading my witnesses too much, really, I'm tempted to ask Sophie and Mark, where did it all go so right? Is that a good opening gambit to start with? And perhaps, Sophie, I could start with you on that one.
Yes, thank you, Jenny. Where did it all go so right? So if I could just say, actually, and ignore your question for a moment, that I was really impressed by the number of responses to this year's survey, because what that means is that our research is materially so much more sound, and that is the results of it are so meaningful. Now, obviously, where it all went so right, I would say, is many people returning back to going back to the office. That has been obviously a driver for investment in managing the spaces, and it was really quite good to see that increased investment in space managed and investment in that workspace is coming to the fore, because obviously, from our perspective, we really understand that the investment in workplaces is absolutely critical for driving productivity. So that whole return to the office with more people going back has been really good, both for service providers and also the other side for the clients, who should have seen that increase in productivity. What was really interesting in the top line results around the mandated return to the office was that not necessarily everyone sees it as necessarily a positive. And I just found that very interesting, especially from a public sector perspective. The feedback seems to be more on the negative side. And if we link that back to possibly the budgets that they've got access to, or perhaps they just don't like the mandated return to office, one can speculate on that, but that is where we see a difference, that not everyone is necessarily enjoying that return to the office. And if I could just pick up on something else that is really seeming to go right is the level of investment is really seeming to drive things forward. Of course, the key areas being for us sustainability, technology, and that workspace. But what I thought was really interesting is, especially from an FM service providers, is that link. If you do the investment, there is a positive link with profitability. And I think that is a very important lesson for people to take away, that investment does indeed pay off.
That's a really powerful point, isn't it, Sophie? And I think your comment there about the sort of the swing we're seeing in people perhaps going back into the workplace is really, really interesting. And it's also useful in the report itself to look at some of the anecdotal comments that we've pulled through that really sort of comment on that, actually either side of a line, which is really interesting. I wonder if I can come to you, Mark, just for a general feel on this, on the kind of practitioner side, as it were. What surprised you in this overall? And then perhaps once you've kind of given us that sense, if you could maybe comment on the inflation costs question, which I think is still very, very, very much on the scene here. But firstly, what if anything really struck you as different this time, and what are you thinking about that kind of still that pressured environment that we're actually feeling come through the pages of this report, I think?
Yeah, thanks, Jenny, and hi to everyone, and thank you for inviting me again. I can't believe it's 12 months since the last time that we were discussing this one. I also feel duty bound that I should kind of maybe use some kind of nautical analogies given the front cover and what we're talking about before. So if I can just kind of surmise where there's an element of surprise, I suppose there's a general feel, I suppose, that we're in calmer waters, and that things seem to be settling a bit. I am a natural optimist, but there are undercurrents. Honestly, I've not written all these nautical ones down. They're flowing, but I will stop in a second. But we're in calmer waters, but using that kind of analogy as well as the fact that there is something potentially storm clouds on the horizon and there are choppier waters. And I think that comes through a bit on what was kind of mentioned a bit in areas of it. So I think one of the surprising things for me is the fact that we've talked a lot about within the industry about kind of that rationalization, and it's Sophie mentioned it, that rationalization of workspaces, that organizations are looking at cost efficiencies. There is so much budgetary pressure at this moment in time. How are you kind of maximizing your workspaces and the services that are being delivered to get those efficiencies? And it looks as though that plateau of rationalization appears to have been hit, and that one of the key pointers there that surprised me actually that more and more companies actually are looking at increasing their workspace, their building footprint. So that's a really, really encouraging sign to me. I think in terms of the second point you mentioned, Jenny, in terms of inflationary pressures, I think more and more organizations, because of the economic uncertainty, and I know we'll come on to that in the second half, but I think there are budgetary pressures. We as an industry have always had, from a supply side, really, really tight net margins on profitability, and that's really, really continued. And if clients aren't prepared to necessarily to increase budgets, and those labour costs are increasing, like we're talking about, some areas of cost efficiencies have got to be generated. And I think more clearly from the survey, and from my experience as a practitioner, as a consultant, more and more organisations are looking at areas where those cost efficiencies can be generated, and whether that be in terms of how the services are provided, or even alluding to what we were saying before about training and investment. Are more and more companies actually wanting to invest in their own people, training their own people, because there's a skill shortage out there in certain areas. So it throws up a whole different areas. But I think that the final thing I would mention on the cost element to it is the fact that more and more organizations are concerned about kind of fixed pricing, and very much wanting to kind of provide a cost certainty in the short term, but absolutely have indexation at years 2, 3, 4, 5, and whatever. They're not prepared necessarily to be giving cost fixed prices for a 3 or 4 year period, because just the uncertainty. The Bank of England has said inflation is going to increase potentially as this year goes on. So what level we're gonna see on that will be interesting. But I know it's time pressure, so I'm gonna stop there and pass back there, Jenny.
Thank you, Mark. You really took us through a lot there, and I absolutely was loving those nautical metaphors. So thank you very much for your diligence in going through that. But I really, there's lots of juggling going on, isn't there? And it's really, really clear. And I think as one of the things that was also apparent from the slides that Stuart took us through is that as we kind of go into this period of political volatility, people tend to be more neutral about things they can't see, and business really does want certainty and does really want to try and to understand the things that it can stick on and the things that it can twist on, and how to kind of really try to plan ahead, particularly when you think of, and I know that we'll get onto this, when you think of, well, when we know, actually we don't even think of it, we know that the challenges that we're facing can only have long-term solutions to them. When we think about achieving net zero, when we think about skills, when we think about the massive investments that are necessary to make, you can't do that on short-term decision making. And I think one of the things we talked about too when we were having our conversation about how to plan for this session was that there is good news in the economy with inflation coming down, but that doesn't mean prices are getting less. It just means that they're going up less quickly. And I think that there's still that feel. But thinking about that, and I'm not replete with maritime metaphors, but as an open water swimmer, one can't help thinking about cold water shock when you look at the lack of the fixed budgets and the challenges that people are doing when they're trying to cope with fixed costs. And I wonder, Sophie, whether or not you've got any thoughts about how professionals can really make the case for larger budgets. What are the things that they've got in their armory that can help them to make the case for larger budgets where they can really make an impact on their organisation's effectiveness?
Yes, sure. And I will, as part of my answer, I'm going to come back to some of the shorter and longer term challenges, because I think they are making it a lot more difficult at times to really plan for the longer term, even though that's exactly what people, of course, should be doing. But how can people make the best case for larger budgets? Well, first, I would say, possibly controversially, that we're needing to talk about the right budgets for the right plans. There are some very compelling needs that need to be addressed. We need to make sure that we keep the right skills. Therefore, that talent attraction piece requires investment, maintaining the skills within your business so your business can grow, requires investment, ongoing investment in productivity and in your workspace. All of those will have specific needs. And what the business case will ultimately need to do is clearly outline the required investment needed, supported by the right data. Because I'm saying this because when it comes to sustainability, we are seeing that wonderful increase in investment, but what we're not necessarily seeing is the investment from other research that is done to the right degree, and the return on investment expectations are completely unrealistic. So there will need to be choices being made on particular budgets because they are under pressure. But to come back to the approach that obviously should be taken, it is about linking in with business objectives, which ones are the biggest threats and opportunity on your risk register, and make sure that you can mitigate those as appropriate with the right investments to make sure that you remain competitive. And for FMs, it will be really important to link in with that business language. And when we're coming back to something like sustainability, for example, to really use that ESG language that you can hook into what is needed to demonstrate progress for ESG, for example. And then really make that link back on how FMs within their projects are critical within that, because we're very clear that FMs are absolutely critical if we're needing to see a reduction in carbon happening that's going towards net zero in 2050. It can't be done and without FMs, who are ultimately the custodians of the buildings that people operate in. So those are really the key elements. Now, on the short and longer term issue is that really comes a little bit in contradiction with the flexible needs that we're seeing from the survey. And also what Mark said, we're understanding that people are not willing to commit to fixed term prices because there is just too much volatility, whether that is on an inflation perspective, whether that is energy prices. So how do you manage that? And that flexibility will need to be paired with the longer term plans, and it will need to be built in. But obviously longer term plans and longer term relationships will help to deliver on efficiencies that are needed.
Thank you, Sophie. We've got about a minute before we need to get Stuart with his next session, but you've both touched on skills, and I just wanted perhaps to pick up with you both, because although the results on skills and people investing in skills I thought was really encouraging this year, and there's definitely been an uptick in that, there was still a huge neutral block of organisations that hadn't really increased their investment on skills. And so there seems to be this kind of jargon alert, cognitive dissonance going on, where people are really recognising the need to invest in new areas, and in fact are actually doing that, but skills is a bit stagnant. Is what are you both seeing there? Is that a function of budget challenges? Is it inertia? Is it disconnect? What's your feel on that? And probably most importantly, what could we do to change the mindset and the importance of skills investment, do you think?
I'm happy to come in on that if that's okay with you, Sophie. I think generally what I've found in the last 12 months from both institute work, but also from consultancy work, as well as the fact that there has been an element of firefighting by a lot of organizations of dealing the day-to-day stuff and waiting for the dust to settle to understand exactly what the future is going to be looking like. And I think there's an element which I find a lot where organizations haven't really and certainly workplace facilities managers haven't necessarily come up for air and understood exactly what's going on in the marketplace. And I have those conversations quite a lot, particularly on a consultancy basis, where they say, we need to know what's going out there in the market and understand what other organizations are doing. And sometimes it helps to bring that short-term kind of project capability into organizations to be able to do that without them necessarily recruiting and taking on their own overhead over, to be able to do that, but just to give that fresh insight. And I think from an institute point of view, absolutely, that's, a lot of what we do in terms of as the kind of the research insight, good practice guides. It is trying to inform people as to the membership as to what they need to be doing and what's on the horizon side of things. And as we found, particularly in the skill shortage side of things, is that there is potentially a need, like I mentioned before, of upskilling their own people. And I've had conversations with clients on exactly that basis, where they've said maybe some new people, a new estates director or management team have come into an organization and said, actually, our team have been left to do their own thing for too long, and we've not invested in them and their development, and they feel a bit unloved. And now's the time that we know that retention is critical. Recruiting new people is a real challenge. So we need to go down that professionalization route and development route with our own people. And I think I wouldn't be surprised in 12 months' time whether we see that as a bit more of a trend, that organizations are putting the budgets into there and ring fencing that to say, no, we've got to become a bit more kind of self-sufficient in what we're doing, but also more effective in what we're doing, and upskilling our people and put them on that career path.
Well, you've said you were an optimist, Mark. I really like that comment, and that hope that that's what we will see going forward, and really interesting rationale, I think, for what's happening. I think we'll come back to skills in the second part, Sophie. So I am going to move us forward, if that's okay, because I want to make sure we can do our little poll at the end. And without further ado, here is Stuart.
Great, thanks, Jenny. So moving on to the next set of findings, and starting with EDI, and we again asked this important question: so how will your organizations focus on EDI change in the next 12 months? And as has been the case each year since 2021, a continued increase in EDI is expected in the next 12 months by most respondents. So you can see in 2024, that's at 53%. again, a very encouraging finding, and again, something that will fill the sails with air. We also went on to ask about whether organizations had drawn up EDI plans. And at the bottom right, we found that the majority, 52%, had. You'll find further breakdowns in the report about what stage specifically they're at, but 19% have fully implemented these and 27% are currently implementing them. For those with plans, we asked this next question. How would you describe the level of involvement of WFM stakeholders in drawing up these plans? And to be honest, we weren't quite sure what to expect with the result of this question. But again, what we found was really reassuring. So overall, 84% had some involvement, and there were encouraging levels of participation across organizations of different sizes. So WFMs are playing their part in the EDI side, which is great. Moving on to sustainability, and we thought it would be really useful for the market to understand what others are prioritizing, to essentially allow you to sense check your own priorities and to spot emerging areas of focus. So we asked this question: what are the priority areas for sustainability in your organization over the next 12 months? And right at the top are the interrelated areas of carbon reduction in its many guises and energy efficiency, which were prioritized by more than 50% of organizations. Those two were closely followed by health, safety, and well-being. And then in the kind of 30 to 40% band is waste and recycling and EDI. And on the face of it, those priorities align very well with the responsibilities and competencies of WFMs. Superb news. But our most recent sustainability report flags the fact that WFMs aren't playing a big enough role when it comes to those two top priorities of energy efficiency and carbon reduction. So in this next slide, I just wanted to share a star finding from the sustainability report. Lucy, if you wouldn't mind moving that forward. So this question is, how would you describe the level of involvement of FM stakeholders in drawing up your energy efficiency and decarbonisation net zero plans? And you can see there on the right-hand side that we have various options running from no involvement to leading the entire process. And we discussed with the Sustainability SIG how best to interpret this and what they thought were the necessary levels of involvement of WFMs in this process. And the SIG were very firmly of the view that FMs either needed to be key stakeholders or lead the entire process. And you can see that 52% were key stakeholders and 13% led the entire process. More concerningly, 1 in 3 weren't meeting that measure, were failing short of the necessary level of involvement. So there's a real and pressing need to do more there. The final set of findings, if we just move to the next slide, that I wanted to share relate to the UK general election, which is now officially less than 1 month away. And the first question we asked was, from a business perspective, how are you feeling about the outcome of the next general election? And significantly, there were more respondents feeling pessimistic about the outcome of the next general election than optimistic. And this really underlines the high level of uncertainty that many businesses are feeling at the moment. And if we move on to the next slide, the follow-up question that we asked was, what measures would you most like the elected government to take to better support the FM market? I'll run you through the answers, and then I'm sure Mark and Sophie will pick up on them. But right up front was growing the economy, 63%. Then we have 3 options of fairly similar levels of support. Develop a coherent plan on achieving net zero, reduce uncertainty around government policy, and provide support to people to help with the cost of living. And then there's a number of factors beyond that. If you want to just run your eye over, there's the skills, there's certainly bringing people back to the office. There's AI there that feature. That's it in terms of findings, but just in this next slide, I wanted to flag some of the lovely data sets that Jenny has already touched on that give fantastic visibility into the market, much more so than what we've seen in the past. Notably, we asked respondents to the survey about the size of their budgets. So you will have now something to compare your own budget to, or indeed, if you're FM service provider, a better sense of what budgets look like in the market. We also include all manner of ONS data on the size and growth of the FM services market, which should prove really useful when you're looking for key data on the market for your own internal analysis and comparison purposes. So if we flick through to the final summary slide, just to reiterate the points. So the proud legacy on focusing on EDI continues with encouraging levels of WFM involvement. Organizations are prioritizing energy efficiency and carbon reduction, but without the full support of WFMs. And then there's a loud and clear call on government to create a better business climate. And Jenny, if I'll pass back to you now.
Thank you so much, Stuart. That's a really great go through there, and I really want to jump straight to Sophie and Mark to get their general observations really on what they've heard. Some of that we heard from the sustainability research in 2023, so we saw it foreshadowed. But headline views. Who'd like to give us a take on that?
I'll let Sophie go first. That gives me some thinking time.
Thanks, Mark.
Go for it, Sophie.
Obviously, in terms of focus around sustainability and EDI, I'm really pleased to see some of the commitments ongoing towards the future. The biggest surprise for me was really the comparison with the sustainability survey and the level of engagement that FMs have in the drawing up of carbon reduction plans. The data clearly shows how much of the sustainability activity falls within their remit, yet there is that lack of proactivity, of ownership, which frankly goes through the entire planning around sustainability. So it is not just on FMs. But the surprise really then came that when it came to EDI, that really seems to be an area where a lot more people take ownerships and where FMs actually played a big role. And perhaps that's not entirely surprising because FM as a sector in its totality does employ around 4 million people. I might be getting my numbers wrong now, but it employs a significant amount of people across UK PLC, and to either retain those people or draw more people in, you need to make sure that you can attract people from groups that you're possibly currently not employing, or you need to make sure that there is a pathway for them to move up. So that was a really nice encouragement to see that there is that understanding around the wider skills gap and that FMs are playing a very big role in that area in driving forward plans within organisations.
Thank you, Sophie. It's really good to get that perspective because it looked like a kind of, I was really pleasantly surprised, like you, about the EDI finding. And I think, you know, we're always learning, aren't we, that this is a people profession fundamentally. So it kind of stands to reason that this, you know, workplace and facilities managers would have a stake in EDI plans, and I thought that was really encouraging. Mark, what was your feeling from what you heard from Stuart? Where are you landing?
Yeah, and I suppose the interesting side of it for me really is if we kind of look at the political elements of some of these topics. So the drivers we know has been on EDI for a number of years now, and the Institute has you know really kind of been wanting to push that forward. I think the important thing, you know, is when we're talking about plans, we've also got to talk about actions, because it's okay about these organizations drawing up these plans, but we need to see some credible evidence of it. And hopefully in future surveys, we'll get some evidence. And as more and more research comes out in that area, I think that is absolutely critical, because then that will kind of evidence exactly what's been doing. But just going back on that political element to it, is you've got the EDI side of things. And then suddenly in the last 12 months in the run up to election, you've got the government kind of challenging that, and particularly with the civil service, and you know, thinking that it'd be a vote winner. And then if you go back on the sustainability side of things and the carbon net zero targets, and you look at behaviour of the UK government, but also the Scottish government as well in terms of this rollback element to it. And I think the interesting thing when we're talking about what's going forward is what's the political agenda going to be on a lot of these issues, really, and how do we align with what's going on there? I think just from a carbon reduction point of view, I think the interesting thing for me is the fact is that we're always looking for opportunities for the profession to really be in the spotlight and to push forward some of these areas. And you know, we talked after during COVID and post-COVID about it really being an opportunity for FMs to really to drive the workplace agenda in terms of that whole experience and how FM plays a crucial part in that. And we thought that was the opportunity. And then when we're looking at sustainability, you know, the number of times in the last couple of years I've heard people say about, you know, this is FM's opportunity here because we can be directly involved in driving these carbon net zero and decarbonisation plans. And the survey results are telling us actually we're not having as much impact as we need to be or could have. And I suppose from my perspective is, what are the reasons for that? Is it to do with we're not good enough yet at analysing the data or getting the data that we need to have to be able to kind of model these and specifically then to show the return on investment on some of these projects? And as a profession, I think, you know, we do need to get a lot better in terms of our usage of the data and analytics of it. Do we have enough expertise within the profession, and are we good enough? Are we looking further afield, or should we be looking further afield, particularly within universities, of people coming out that have this sustainability expertise that we can kind of use within the profession, really? So do we need to kind of broaden that outlook and that search for people that have got that expertise that can help us kind of push forward in some of these things and have an active role? And I suppose the final point, really, and this came out of at the event that the Institute held at the University of Bolton that Sophie and I attended a couple of weeks ago. And we had Reid Cunningham there from BUM-FM, who I know that, you know, has been one of the key drivers of the Scope 3 emissions guidance that's been coming out. And Reid's feedback was, as organisations are still not asking enough of their supply chain and adopting and measuring the Scope 3 emissions, because that has a key role to play. So we've got the models out there, we've got the guidance out there, but perhaps as an industry and profession that perhaps we're just not using those as much as we could do to drive these forward and using the resources available. So there could be a myriad of different reasons for that, I think.
Thank you, Mark. I'm really glad you picked up on that sustainability point, because it's come from the original sustainability research, and then in this report you see the kind of disparity, because it is a really big area of investment, but you know, the sector's not quite as influential as it needs to be. And Sophie, I cannot imagine you have not got anything to say on this point, given the work that your team's been doing around this. So do you want to give us a flavour of, well, first of all, your own kind of sense of it and your own reaction to the findings, and then also the work that you've been leading in the research and insight team to kind of try and help to answer or equip the sector to you know, be more influential in this space?
Yes. So obviously, around sustainability, part of the reason why we started to ask a little bit more questions in this particular arena is because we're very conscious that in the sustainability survey, we're always talking to the sustainability experts, and we wanted to really understand what the senior leaders in organizations, how that correlated with what the experts are thinking, because they're not always the same cohort. They can be, but they're not always the same cohort. So in that case, the research was really encouraging that investment is being unlocked. But as Mark indicated, there is, from our own research from many years ago, and actually we've been talking about this effectively for 20 years, how much progress and impact has been made, a question mark. So the whole area around skills, do people really sufficiently understand what the activity is they need to undertake and how they need to leverage everything to their disposal to get towards what they need to achieve? The data to be used. We've just released, just a few months ago, our energy management GPG, which has got a section on data, but we're very much aware on how important data is to feed into the business cases to make the case for investment in this area, and we know that greater investment is needed Now, and as part of that, we will be producing a piece of work on guidance on how to produce better business cases. But really, the whole point around business cases is that it isn't just about the data that is lacking or not using the right data to unlock the investment. It's also not necessarily being completely locked into the language of the business. And the return on investment, and especially at a time like this, when there is this strain on budget, is so often being brought back to what is the cost and can we have a return on investment within 2-3 years. And this is where we really need to look at much more innovative solutions, some of which may have barriers in place, but we all need to work on unlocking those. But there are increasingly more innovative financial solutions available that also try and mitigate some of that fluctuating pricing that Mark was talking about previously, or also when it comes to ownership, that you're not necessarily having to do a complete capital expenditure, but you try and bring in your solutions as part of your OPEX. But really, the thing that we're very passionate about, of course, is the entire policy position that we've got, that FMs are the linchpin profession because they bring together the needs of the landlord, the end user, and the supply chain. And without the FM that can manipulate all those different things, manipulate is possibly the wrong thing, but bring it together, we're not going to get there. But what we are seeing from the research is that there is that gap of ownership around the sustainability piece, the net zero transition plans. So that is the opportunity exactly for the FM to step into that. And now we so often hear that, well, we know that FMs have got so much on their plate. Mark, you already talked about the fact that people don't stop running around, and that's very true. And there might be other people in the business that might have sustainability in their title, but those people still don't have the knowledge to leverage the combination of the space that is being managed and the behaviors around the people. That does lie with the FM. So to bring it back, it's that lack of ownership, that space needs to be stepped into. There needs to be a degree of proactivity, and then the business language really needs to be tapped into. And where you need to bring in the people that can help bring that journey to life and perhaps reposition some of the expenditure that need to be done, and make sure that when you are considering capital investment, that you are looking at the whole life cycle of both the building, the business needs of the building, and then the whole life cycle of what you are investing in. So really, those are kind of the key areas to touch upon. And from an institute perspective, we are starting our skills survey. No doubt you will make a point around that, Jenny, because we want to make sure that our members have got the right skills in this place. So we are stress testing what we have, so we can derive all the best possible support that our members need for them to significantly drive forward impacts in this area.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to move us forward because hands over your ears if you're not really interested in the general election, but we do have one around the corner. And Sophie, I know you're already thinking about what IWFM might be wanting to argue for change in that area. Our communities are also really busy thinking about this. We've got a session with them tomorrow, Mark, we know. And as we've seen in today's Facilitate online, we've seen Gordon Mitchell's thoughts. He's the chair of our technology SIG, so he's got out of the traps very quickly. It would be rude not to take the pulse of the room on where we are now that the Jenny Lex, as I'm told the young people call it, is actually a reality, and as Stuart said, will be with us in 4 weeks' time. So Lucy, I hope you've got a little poll prepared, which is a repetition of the question we asked survey respondents to the Outlook survey in February. This is focusing on the top answers, but I wonder whether or not our room could give us a sense of the measures they would most like the next elected government to take to better the workplace and facilities market. You've got a single choice, so you can only choose one. We've made it really hard for you. If you'd like to tell us where you are with that, we'd be really interested just to take a sense of that, and then I'll be asking the panel what they think of what you have said. While you're answering that question, somebody has asked in our chat where they can find the sustainability guidance that we mentioned. It is on our website. If you just go www.iwfm.org.uk/insight, you will find our sustainability hub there and all of the guidance you need to see. And thank you for that question. Lucy, have we got scores on the doors? Oh, okay, so really interesting. I'm not sure whether anybody can see this but me, so I shall read it out, which is in descending order of popularity. 33% of you would like to see a focus on growing the economy. The same number of you, so that's a third of you, would like to see a coherent plan to achieve net zero from the next government. 17% of you, so that's the third most popular, is support to people to help the cost of living, followed by 10% of you would like to see the government develop an overarching skills strategy, and 7% would like to see workers encouraged back into offices in town centres. Nobody voted to reduce uncertainty around government policy, so I'm not sure what we should make of that, whether that means that everybody's really certain or the other things are uppermost in your mind. I suspect it might be the latter. So Mark and Sophie, a third each of people wanting to see a focus on net zero and wanting to see a focus on I forgot what the other one was, Lucy, you took it away so quickly.
Skills.
Sorry, yeah. Skills, growing the economy, coherent plan to check net zero, and skills. They were the top three. What are you making of that, both of you?
Can I just if I just make a couple of quick points and then allow Sophie really to give her thoughts as well. The first point I would make is the fact if you don't have the skills in place, you're not going to get the growth. And I think I fundamentally believe that. I speak to FM companies that say we would love to be doing more work, but we can't get enough engineers, or we can't get, it's a barrier to that. So I'd made my own notes here in terms of what the priority should be and what I think that would come out of it. But the skills, a coherent longer-term skills strategy is utterly crucial, and that takes into account the EDI, but it also takes into account those of us that are the older members of the workforce. And Facilitate recently did quoted some research from Corndells that was saying I think it was over 50% of over 50s felt that they're overlooked for skills development, professional development, almost written off. And you talk to people that are looking for work in that age category as well, and it's a really, really difficult one for them to. So there is ageism within the UK economy in terms of that. So I think there's elements of the skills strategy. The other thing in terms of sustainability is the fact, and Sophie's far better an expert in this area than me, but I've heard commentators say that if you have a coherent target in place and something to aim for, then the momentum of achieving that is just drives the action and the investment. But if you've got uncertainty and you're putting back those targets, then that investment doesn't happen at the same rate of pace. And I think that's where we've got to be more coherent and kind of firmer in terms of that, and not, like was said on the election debate last night, that it's a global problem and it's not just us that's got to solve it. I get that, but we've got to try and do our own thing and try and lead the way. So Sophie, over to you on that.
Thank you very much. I've got a question for you as well from Melanie Womack. So you give a reaction, Sophie, in 1 minute, and I'd like you to address Melanie's question if that's okay. When you've commented. Thank you.
I was going to agree with Mark because it goes back to some of the commentary that's been made by the governments in the past that you alluded to, Mark. And without having that coherent approach, it's not just the investment that doesn't get unlocked in the capital investment in what is needed. It's the underpinning supply chain that is not going to feel the urgency to deliver against that, which brings us back to the skills debate. And then the whole scalability argument is collapsing almost in itself. So that whole coherence of a plan is absolutely requiring government support. That said, I don't see where there is going to be wriggle room for any financial support as such for the future, because from a budgetary perspective, there are no untapped pots that can be accessed. So a lot of it, well, the investment is going to have to come from industry anyway. And if government doesn't fill the gap, then frankly, it's collaborations through ourselves, including that we're going to need to drive forward on where the priorities are needing to be. And that's not a sufficient answer, but we can't wait around for a coherent plan forever.
Right, thank you, Sophie. I think you're both so important what you've both said about skills and certainty, and it's almost making me wonder. We will talk a little bit right at the very end about our skills research, whether or not we should come back and have a broader conversation about this as well with our audience. But I just wanted to put this question from Melanie Womack to you both before we wrap up, which is the panel unduly concerned about the low score in the research for adopting new technology within sustainability?
Yeah, and if I can just, because it'd be rude of me not to use another sailing analogy, given that we're coming to the end of the session. So if we can kind of link the technology is almost the sails that is driving the pace of that sustainability, and why are those sails kind of almost like not at full mast and driving that? There's two elements to it, as far as I would say, Melanie, and it doesn't surprise me. The two elements where I think why that may be the case is, first of all, who pays. So have clients got the budgets to be able to trial some of this technology and use it? Well, we know that budgets are really tight. That's what the survey is saying. So maybe they haven't got that. And then also, who pays? Well, do the FM co-pays? Well, we know that margins are really, really tight and labour costs are going increasingly as well. So do they have the funds to be able to invest in some of this new technology and to be able to show it to the clients? So that's one element on the sustainability. The other side, I would say as well, is the fact, as an industry, sometimes we're not particularly great at the adoption of new technology in certain areas. We know that, and you can see that with the use of CAFM systems and other kind of elements of that as well, is that we need to get a lot better of that and understanding what is this technology doing. So, if we talk about IoT, we talk about sensor technology and things like that, but really, what are the practical benefits of it, and do we understand what it can deliver on the sustainability side of things as well? And I think there's still a lot of learning and understanding and knowledge needed in that area.
I would add to that, Mark, that there is possibly still a lot of scope for improvement around the optimization of the technology ecosystem that organizations are currently using, where they are not properly feeding into each other, and therefore a lot of information is not being fed into the decision making where it's needed. And therefore that alignment of that ecosystem, it is one of the areas that we want to look at from a guidance perspective, because we know that creates a gap in the availability of data.
Thank you both very much. Now, if this was Radio 4, we would just about be hearing the dulcet tones of the music sailing by coming in for the close down, just to complete our sailing analogy. But alas, we've got no more time, but I feel that we could have carried on this conversation couldn't we? So thank you so much to Stuart, Sophie and Mark for their time and for their insights and inputs. As this is Stuart's last outing for IWFM, as he bows out to pursue the career change that he was on course to make before we nabbed him, kept him for a year longer than he possibly could have anticipated, to thank him for the energy and vim he's brought to our core research programme in the last year. So thank you, Stuart. To you, our listeners, thank you so much for your time and your inputs and your questions. A recording will be available to anybody who wants to listen again or share it with a colleague that you know should be engaging with us and our work. We've had a really good taste of the insights and commentary already from this report, but honestly, please do engage with it in its full form. The team's work has been quite astonishing on this. It's a really good companion to carry you through the year with some really good pointers for the rest of the year. So do take the time to download it and read it. There's the QR code for you. It's available free to members. If you're not a member and you want to know more, get in touch. If you like what we're doing, please tell us what you liked and why. And if you'd like to see something else, please tell us what in the chat or in your feedback forms, which would be really good for you to fill in. I think the CPD number, Lucy, is coming up for today's webinar on screen. And then before we let you go, one very, very important notice, which Sophie's already alluded to. The research team isn't resting. IWFM Skills Survey 2024 will be launched, I believe, imminently, possibly tomorrow. This is the essential survey on the competencies required for workplace and facilities management today, and we'll be in the capable hands of our new senior research manager, Melissa Gilbert, and the team. They will be taking that forward. Open to everybody, members and non-members are encouraged to participate, so please do, because the results will provide a really detailed picture of the competencies at various levels right throughout the profession, and the results will be shared back with you. The research will also explore how you, our members, would like IWFM to support your career progression through training, qualifications, best practice, CPD, anything else you would like that we can offer you as your professional body. Please fill it in. It will take no more than 20 minutes, absolute tops. We'll be back soon. In the meantime, log into our back catalogue, all available on the website. And thank you again for joining us. Have a good afternoon and a really great week. Bye-bye.